Hey guys, welcome to another week of the KiS Organics and sometimes Chad Westport Organics Q&A. Thank you for those of you that have been tuning in every week for this. We really appreciate it, and thanks for all the great questions. Last week especially had some really great questions. I know I wanted to start out talking about, but Brandon, did you have anything you wanted to say, or how are you doing?
Knock on rocks, man. It's that time of year in Washington State that we're all waiting for. It's absolutely gorgeous. I've been busy, so I haven't been out hiking like I want to, but things are good. Um, if I had any topic this week, I've talked to a bunch of growers this week that have fried some clones, and in most cases, it was a situation where they, got soil that wasn't fully finished, or they added nutrients and didn't check their soil, just the temperature. And that's just a good reminder, I think, for folks that when you amend, I'm so used to pulling on Friday, I'm usually amended and back in the bed Saturday or Sunday. But we always have to listen to the plants. We always have to listen to the soil too. And so if you can turn your soil and it remains at ambient temperatures, then you're safe to plant. If you turn that soil in like a compost pile, it heats back up. That means there's a lot more nutrient cycling that needs to happen, and all kinds of things can happen from ammonia to temperature. And so just a reminder that we use our senses to watch our plants. Do the same thing with your soil, especially before replanting.
Yeah, maybe we should talk about that process a little more depth. That's probably a good topic to start with. So basically, when you mix soil, you're adding nutrients. These nutrients are not in the form that the plant can typically, as a general rule, take up. So let's just say alfalfa meal, fish meal, whatever, any of these things that contain NPK. So at that point, what has to happen is the microorganisms need to break down these nutrients into an ionic forms that the plant can then take up. And for this to occur, there's a few things that need to happen. They need access to oxygen, they need access to moisture, they need access to a food source. And so as these microorganisms are consuming, let's just stick with alfalfa meal. Let's say as they're consuming that alfalfa meal, they're going to be reproducing. And that reproduction, the increase in bacteria that's happening is an exothermic reaction. It generates heat, and that heat is not great for your plant roots. So it's important to make sure after adding nutrients that you wait for this. If you add enough that they actually reproduce at a rate that causes the soil to heat up above your ambient air temperature, then you'll want to wait before you plant into it. Because if you plant into it too soon, like Brandon was saying, and that soil is hot, one, not only do your plants not like warm roots at those temperatures typically, but also that bacteria is going to be more efficient at utilizing the food resources. So even if you have, let's say, adequate nitrogen in the soil, or you just added a nitrogen amendment, you may see a nitrogen deficiency. So that's just something to be aware of when we're looking at mixing soils. And on that note, maybe we should talk a little bit about nitrogen, because I think people misunderstand that. I had talked to a guy last week about in depth. He was trying to compare soil tests from all these different soil companies and make a spreadsheet to create his own list of targets. And then he was testing at a different lab. And so there was a whole bunch of challenges with this. One, some of the tests, first and foremost, some of the tests that I see online that people publish, I can tell that they pulled the soil test too soon, and their nitrogen numbers are going to be wildly inaccurate. Specifically, if you see a high ammonium number and a very low nitrate number, that tells me that they just added a bunch of food to the soil in the form of fertilizers, or they just added an unfinished compost at some point during the growth cycle. And that doesn't give us a very good idea of what's going on with nitrogen, one, and then two, it's not in a form that the plant really wants it when we're talking about cannabis and most of our vegetable crops. So initially, when you add, let's just stick with alfalfa meal because we've been using that for this example. The nitrogen is going to be in the form of ammonium. It's going to be slowly converted into nitrite and then eventually into nitrate. That's driven by moisture, microbial activity, and soil temperature primarily are the three biggest things that affect that. So if that soil is high in ammonium, and you might recognize that smell, you go to a compost pile that just got turned or was freshly made, and it's leaching nitrogen, volatilizing it. You get that ammonium smell.
Any of the bags at a big box that get wet, like you walk through the soil department at a Home Depot or a Lowe's, and that ammonia stink, that's what you're smelling. It's ammonia.
Yeah. So I guess the point being, if your soil is high in ammonium at the time of planting, you're probably going to see a nitrogen deficiency. You're probably going to see their plant yellow from the bottom up, be lighter green, and just in general be stressed and not happy. So that's one factor. The other factor is it does put an opposite pressure on pH than nitrates. So that's something to be aware of too. You may see your pH change slightly as that nitrogen cycles. And then just something to keep in the back of your mind that further complicates all of this around nitrogen is one of the largest pools of nitrogen in a organic system is organic nitrogen, which is nitrogen that's locked up in organic matter. It's locked up in the cells of the bacteria and the microorganisms, and it's not visible on the soil test. So all of these things come into play when we're thinking about nitrogen in general and mixing soils. So I just wanted to give a little bit more information there. I hope that clarifies it and doesn't just muddle everything.
Yeah, the only things I would add, another reason you could see high ammonium, if your soil's too wet, you could see high ammonium. And then just in reference to the gentleman that was trying to make the spreadsheet with all the different labs, who was it? Miss Reinheimer, I think, sent that really great graph showing the disparities for certain things between different labs. And I thought that was very impactful because we talk about that all the time. You want to stay with a lab, establish targets with that lab, and then use those targets, because the lab that we work with, Logan, we really like, and it's accurate and consistent. If we can't even use the same targets that we use if we go to another lab, because depending on the pH of their solution that they're doing their extraction with, we're going to see wildly different numbers. And so it's really important it's not just a little bit, like they could be wildly different targets. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and keep in mind too that we want our target for nitrogen to be in nitrate form. So if you're going off of a soil test that you saw online that people published out of transparency, don't assume that nitrogen number is a good target. If it's 20 ppm of nitrate but 4 ppm of ammonium, that's not optimal. So don't aim for that, I guess. Anyway, all right. Moving on, we had some questions. I did have a quick topic that I thought was interesting. You can tell me if it's not, and we can just skip over it. But we're planting my home garden this weekend, the daughter and the wife, and we had a strawberry bed, and that strawberry bed was chock full of strawberry, like hundreds of strawberries in let's just call it approximately a 4x4 bed. And it was a 2-foot bed, and the soil had dropped down over the last couple of years, about 8 inches. So it was really low in the bed, and just aesthetically, I didn't like the look of it. I was like, all right, we have too many strawberry plants in here. Even though they're healthy, we're going to take them out, replant them with proper spacing, and just get a reset, fill the bed back up with soil, because that bulk density of the soil goes down over time. The organic matter is being broken down too. So that level is going to go down year after year, and just, loosen up the soil again. So we did all that. My wife handled the transplanting. And so here's the picture. We have
Are you about to throw her under the bus here?
we have a wheelbarrow full of like extra strawberry plants just chucked in a corner, right? They're just stacked up in the wheelbarrow. We have all the properly spaced and planted strawberries left in the bed. There's maybe 20 strawberry plants left in the bed. And then we have some that we transplanted into pots. So we have 3 different sets of the same strawberries that were obviously disturbed when we pulled them out. The ones that were in the wheelbarrow that didn't get watered were the best looking ones, and the ones in the bed looked dead. And I was like, okay, what happened here? Like, my wife, throwing her under the bus a little bit, she knows how to transplant. I've taught her, and we reviewed it again this weekend. But what had happened was when and this is the point I'm bringing people, it was in our soil mix, our commercial growers mix. And the soil had gotten really dry because it's been sunny out lately, hasn't rained. And so what I think happened, well, what I know happened is she went to water that bed because she knows you have to water in a transplant. And she added some water, but that water didn't actually penetrate into the soil to where the roots were because that bed was pretty hydrophobic. So long story short, those plants didn't get any water at all. Whereas the ones that were in the wheelbarrow, I probably splashed them with a little bit of water and they got more access to water just being buried under each other. And so this weekend, it actually happened last weekend, I misstated. So this weekend, when we went back out there, I actually transplanted the ones in the wheelbarrow back into the bed. And then I cut off all the extra growth. I cut off all the berries, really just cut them back to the roots so they could put energy into regrowing new growth rather than trying to keep alive these long leaves and berries that weren't going to really produce. So those are just some different gardening things that happened in my garden this year that I thought was kind of interesting story.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I find it really interesting out here. I was just playing with strawberries this weekend, and something your dad has kind of challenged me to do. He's like, don't worry about it. Not because I'm so South Carolina, in my head, as far as, if you cut something and don't immediately put it into water and hide it someplace away from the sun, it's going to, desiccate and die. Out here, depending on the plant, I can pull plants, cut them, and just leave them outside, especially if they're even remotely shaded, but even in the sun, and they're fine. I've got a bunch of sweet potato slips that are rooting really nicely, just sitting in a jar on the porch. But I pulled some strawberry plants and just kind of threw them to the side. And I only felt comfortable doing it this year because I did it last year. And they do great, And so I think you're right. I think that she probably put those into just completely dry soil, thought she watered them and didn't. But it's just really interesting to me, just the difference in geographical location, how I can treat a plant. Obviously there's plants I
Yeah.
can't grow here that I could grow there, but just the fact that I can cut a plant and let it sit is wild to me, because when it's 120, you can't. It'll be dead in seconds. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I found myself doing this weekend was I had a bag of mycorrhizal fungi. And as I was going around the garden planting things, because slugs got some of my starts, like I was planting cucumbers. I just went on Google and typed in cucumber mycorrhizal and confirmed that it said, has a relationship with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. So I went ahead and sprinkled some in the hole to give it a head start. And that's a great way to use mycorrhizal fungi. I already knew it had a good relationship with tomatoes and peppers. But checking that is just as simple as a quick Google search. I mean, there's charts and stuff too, but just as I was going through and planting random things, I knew squashes did, so I didn't have to look that one up, but I wasn't sure about cucumbers. So that was a quick and easy one to just pop into Google to check on. And since I had it already, it was something I added. I know it'll help the plant with drought stress, heat stress, phosphorus, and other nutrient availability. Has a lot of benefits.
Nice. this has nothing to do with this talk, but a garden thing that happened for me this weekend that was really special for me. Both my kids are on spectrum with autism, and my youngest is independent. My oldest probably will never be independent. But he got dressed up in overalls and came and found me. I was working outside and asked me if he could learn how to weed eat. And he did the entire property for me this weekend. And just
Hey,
a really
congratulations.
proud, special dad moment. So I'll just share that's my cool garden stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into these questions. I don't know if there's a lot to say on this first one, but we'll throw it up there anyway and just go in order. Jeff asks, how can you use a float valve to prevent overflow of a gravity-fed reservoir?
Oh, Jeff and I were talking about that this morning briefly. A
Okay.
float valve, the same way that it works in the toilet, you can set a float valve in a reservoir. I mean, you can buy one off of Amazon, but you can, you could set up a float valve in there so that you have water that fills the tank. But then, based off the float valve, it will cut off a solenoid or however you have it set up so that water's not pouring all over the floor. But with a gravity, he's wanting to use a gravity fed system. So we need to make sure that there's adequate volume, so equals pressure in that tank. So, if you let your tank that's 6 feet off the ground get down to 4 inches, there's not much pressure at all. So, you're not going to be getting the far into your bed's going to be dry probably. And so, yeah, so that's what we were talking about. But as far as how you would actually set that up, it's kind of like growing cannabis. There's probably 1,000 ways, but you could definitely just buy an inexpensive kit. You can
Yeah,
get a mess.
I wouldn't go too crazy on the gravity-fed systems. In general, I just think if that pressure does get too low and you don't get good even pressure in your system, you're going to find that it only waters the first part of your blue mat line. So if you do go gravity fed, my thing is just go big on your reservoir. I'll go, I had like a 50-gallon reservoir on a stand. I had an old compost tea brewer, my dad prototype that my dad had. And so that's what I used for my water thing. And that worked great for, 15 plants with 2 carrots in each pot. But that was kind of overkill, but that was kind of the point. And so then I would check on it every few days and make sure it didn't get below, say, 10 or 20 gallons, or I'd refill it. But in general, if you can do a pressure system rather than gravity fed and hook it up to a line, the only disadvantage of that is well, you're not really saving it on this one now that I think about it, because if you're using a flow valve, you still have the ability for a flood to occur. But the one good thing about it is if you do have a gravity fed system with a reservoir, in theory, when that reservoir empties, that's the most amount of water you're going to spill or flood your grow space, which is nice, I guess, to a certain extent.
Tad, on that same topic, when we were talking, you were explaining to Humble Skunk on the Patreon last week. Would that be a good situation where you maybe want to run a T and loop it back to itself, just as another way of trying to keep pressure?
Yeah, there's some tricks. What I found is if you're having an issue with pressure, you want to run your T earlier in the line. So like coming right off the reservoir, you want to T right away. And if you're not getting enough pressure from there, you want to add another junction right at the beginning there, so that you get as much pressure from the initial gravity or the initial water line, essentially. What we were talking about is if you have a issue with your soaker hose not having enough pressure, that could be your main line not getting enough there, but it could also be just the length of your soaker hose, in which case tying it, looping it, or running it, between 2 different carrots and connecting those so you have 2 different sensor points. That's another way of kind of solving that too. So yeah. All right, Jeff got 2 questions in right early. So here we go.
No
Does
problem.
molasses last 32 hours as a food source in aerated compost teas, or do you need to add more complex carbohydrates? That's a little bit of a complicated question because it depends on how much biology is in the compost you're using. Depends on the temperature, the dissolved oxygen levels that you're at. In general, if you're brewing for 24 to 36 hours, you could absolutely just use molasses as a food source. But I tend to like to add a little bit of organic alfalfa meal. I like the biodiversity that it brings to the table under the microscope. But yeah, you're going to run out of nutrients at some point in time. Typically, that's after 36 hours, though, in my experience. So if you follow the instructions from Tim Wilson on our website blog for compost teas in terms of percentages or ratios, and you're using a proper pump and all of that in your setup, that should work just fine. All right, Brandon, I'm done talking. Can you answer JQ's question? Indoor raised beds, what is the depth?
10 to 12 inches. We see that is more than sufficient to hold, obviously, the first thing that it does is it's a place for your plants to sit and hold the roots or whatever, but it's plenty of environment to hold all of the biology and all of the fertility you need for a full round, 1 to 2 weeks veg, 8 to 9 weeks flower. And the reason that we don't like to go deeper than that is because it makes your irrigation much more difficult. A demonstration that I like to give folks is if you take a beer glass that's tall and thin and you take a scotch glass that's short and wide, fill them both up with sand, pour the same amount of water into them by volume percentage, and then come back in 20 minutes. And the beer glass, most of that water will have traveled to the bottom. It'll be pretty dry up top. With the scotch glass, because of a different surface area to volume ratio, it's going to be much more homogeneously moist. And that's what we want because we want to keep our biology happy and we want to provide a uniform moisture level to the best of our ability for our roots. And so we find that 10 to 12 inches is really the best. If you want to go deeper, KiS has soil you can buy and go deeper, but we want to make it ethical. And so we want to tell growers that, going deeper than that, there's not really an advantage to it. You're just losing money.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is we're not seeing increased yields or anything like that by going to 18 inches or deeper. The only exception to that, I would say, is if you're outdoors and you're growing full season outdoor in California, then we could talk about maybe having a deeper bed for a really large, massive, 15, 20 foot tall plant or whatever. So, yeah. All right, I'm going to throw this up here. Alex, welcome. Awesome to see people from Australia. I just want to throw this up here because I've been talking with Matt Barnes over at KiS Organics. We've been working on a soil formulation now for the last 2 years, and we are about to launch it. It's going to be available really soon. I think it's a really strong commercial formulation that we've done a ton of plant testing with it and it's looking really great. So I can't wait we're just finishing up the bag design now. Can't wait to launch it in the next couple of months. It should be available hopefully wherever you're at in Australia. So yeah, just wanted to share that. And moving down, another just comment. I got interviewed yesterday for a podcast and one of the questions was, who are my favorite breeders? And I said, I am not a huge connoisseur, but Oishi from Archive was the favorite that I've grown recently that the feedback from people who are able to tell those nuances and what they appreciate in a genetics. But in addition to that, some of my favorite growers were Chad. And then I mentioned you as well, Brandon, as 2 people that I get most of my genetics and stuff from these days that are good people to support. And then Crockett Family Farms is the other one. But yeah, just wanted to share that. Appreciate you, Chad. And let's see. All right, moving down. I'm catching up on questions here. All right. If I use a blue mat with a 5-gallon siphon reservoir for a couple outdoor plants, will I need to worry about the water temperature? Brandon.
If they use a what? A 5-gallon?
Siphon reservoir for a couple outdoor plants. Well, I need to worry. So the question is really, does water temperature matter? It doesn't really matter your delivery system. What matters
Yeah,
is your
yeah.
water temperature.
Your
So
water temperature. I'm just thinking, is 5 gallons enough pressure to do a, but I'm not sure how he's got that set up. But so water temperature absolutely matters. Um, if you have the ability, because out here, my water coming out of the ground is really cold. If I was to put that, straight onto my plants, especially indoors, I could be asking for, to shock those plants, like, think about it. I don't know if anybody's ever done this to you, hopefully not, but if somebody's ever thrown a glass of ice water over the shower on you, that's a really horrible, shocking experience. And, you're in this nice, warm environment, and then all of a sudden it's not. And your plant has the same reaction to that. And so, outdoors, if you have the ability to put water into a tank so that it can warm up overnight, then that's a great thing. But a lot of times outdoors, I water straight off the well, and it's super cold. um the outdoor plants seem to be able to tolerate it a lot better. I don't know if it's because the 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 buffer's bigger. I don't know if it's because they're, acclimated and dealing with, you know, 50 degrees, probably a couple inches down. Um, but yeah, so temperature matters, but outdoors I really don't do anything. I don't do anything for my cannabis plants, my vegetables. I don't warm up the water for outside, you know. One of my buddies is always like, "What, Jaws heating the water for just your plants now?" And so, outdoors, plants seem to be adaptive, and it doesn't seem to be an issue. But indoors, I think that they're in this kind of coddled, kind of semi-perfect environment. So I think you can really shock a plant inside. I
just a
feel,
couple quick notes.
yeah.
Optimally, water temperature absolutely matters. Too cold is probably better than too hot. And cold water will hold more dissolved oxygen, which has a bunch of different plant benefits as well. So that's all I would say on that. So I would be careful if it's sitting outside in the hot sun. I wouldn't want to water with water that was 90, 100 degrees. I think you could really damage your plant. So that would be my concern with an outdoor reservoir like you're describing.
If like, even with a hose, when I turn a hose on outside, as cold as the water is, that black hose is really hot just from accumulating solar radiation. And so the first 30 seconds to a minute, when you turn a hose on, you shouldn't put it on your plants. You'll scald
Yeah.
them. And so,
Yeah.
you always want to be cognizant of temperature, but it just doesn't seem, I've never seen it, knock on rocks. I don't want to jinx this season, but I've just never seen it be an impact outside. Indoors, definitely. Um,
Well, I would. This is a hypothesis, but you're putting it through a uh, water breaker, so it's getting diffused into smaller droplets that are getting hit with a little bit of solar radiation on the way down. It hits the soil where the temperature of that soil due to solar radiation is going to be probably higher on a sunny day than it would be in an indoor room where you just have fixed light that's not penetrating as far. So it probably cools the first layer of the soil and it kind of offsets it. They kind of offset each other, I would guess, a little bit before the water works its way down really into the root zone. That would be my guess at what's probably going on in something like that. Because I don't worry about cold water when I water outdoors either in my
yeah,
in my garden for the
yeah.
most part. Good question. All right. Have you ever used organics alive, and would you ever carry a product like that? All right, I'm going to be totally just transparent on this. I reached out to the Organics Alive guys years ago, and we had some really great conversations. I think they're super nice guys. There are two reasons why I don't carry their products, but I can also give you a few reasons for why you might want to consider using them. So I'll just try and be neutral on this. And so the reasons I don't carry their products is one, they weren't able. One of the things that they said was that you can't over apply their grow formulation. For example, the nitrogen in it, they said you can't burn your plant. And it was like, I can't remember what the nitrogen percentage was, but it was significant. Let's just throw out a number like 5%. So if that's at my understanding of plant physiology, if you apply 5% nitrogen to the plant, there is a threshold where you would cause nitrogen toxicity in your soil or burn your plant. And they claimed that was not the case, but they could not explain that to me how. And I said, okay, well, I need to understand how if I'm going to use or recommend or carry this product. So that was the first thing that I struggled with. The second thing I struggled with was I think they're deriving it from algae, but they weren't able to really tell me a lot about that process due to it being proprietary. And I totally understand the need for that in this industry to protect their IP, but that's also another thing that I really, really struggle with. I want to understand how something's processed and the mechanism for what's creating it to really understand the value of it as a product. So that was kind of the second thing. And then the last thing was when you look at their feeding chart, to me, it's pretty complicated and it looks a lot like a bottled nutrient chart, which is one of the reasons I moved to Living Soil, was so I wouldn't have to run a complicated feeding chart and buy all these different products to grow my plant. So those are I guess you could say they're negatives, or they're just the things that cause me not to offer the product through KiS. The reasons I would say to use the product are, one, I've seen heavy metal testing on it and it looks very good. So those guys are crushing it on heavy metals, which I think is really important for a lot of people. So I have to give them credit on that. And then the other thing I think is I've seen some people grow with it and they have some really nice looking plants. So I absolutely believe you could grow a very happy, healthy plant using their product line. I think it might be a little more expensive to do that, and there's other ways to get there, but that's not to say that there's one perfect way to grow a plant. And if you want to use their products, absolutely. So, but those are the reasons why we don't offer them through KiS. We also just try to simplify things and not offer too many products, because I think that gets confusing for consumers. And we just try to carry primarily the stuff that we recommend or things that we've been asked to carry over the years. So I hope that answers it. All right. Brandon, do you want to talk a little about this? What do you think about cover crop rotations? Planting a cover crop until it sprouts, then tilling it back as soon as you see those first true leaves?
I was just talking to a customer this morning about cover crops and mulch, and I know you and I are on the same page with this. Outdoor, I love a cover crop and I love mulch. Indoors, the little bit of benefit that you get from it it's not worth the risk for me as a pest and or pathogen potential nightmare. It makes my job as a somebody that's doing soil analysis much harder, because now I have to grow multiple crops. The fertility, plants aren't benevolent there in that way that, if you grow clover, it's not pumping nitrogen into your soil for the cannabis plants. It has to die, get turned under, and then be broken down and then made available. Erosion is another reason you might want to cover crop, but we don't have that as an issue indoors. And then just the risk. It's when I talk to somebody and they've got thrips and I see they've got straw mulch down and a clover cover crop, that and people get very attached to their cover crops. I know folks that send me pictures of their cover crop more than they send me pictures of their actual cannabis plants, and so people get very invested in that, and I think that's cool. For me, it's just not worth the risk. I would not do it indoors. I think there's a better solution to any benefit.
So the other big reason, at least indoors, that we don't recommend cover crops is when we go to re-amend, we want to get those organic nutrients directly into the soil homogeneously rather than top dressing, because we want it to be available right away. Top dressing, it takes even longer for those nutrients and minerals to break down. And we just don't have a timeline for that in a lot of commercial applications and people that we work with. So those are the biggest reasons. Outdoors, yeah, I think it makes sense. I don't use a lot of cover crops in my garden or mulches. I want to talk a little bit about that too, because there's another question here asking about mulches. They have a lot of benefits, absolutely. Like in terms of keeping your bed moisture more consistent, reducing weed pressure outdoors. There's a lot of benefits. And if I was uh, growing in row crops, I would absolutely be using mulches at the very least. But I'm in raised beds and I have um, wood chips, arborist chips all around those beds to keep down weeds. And so I don't actually mulch my beds primarily for the aesthetics of it. And then I plan my plantings as a way to fill the bed so that eventually the crops themselves are sort of my mulch or my cover crop in the sense that there's not a lot of exposed soil at that point in time. But yeah, you could absolutely make the argument outdoors, I think, for using a cover crop or a straw mulch or some other form of mulch in your garden.
And I would also say it depends, because when I was in South Carolina, I would not have planted outdoors without mulch and cover crop because it was so hot. I can
Yeah.
get away with it in Washington because of where I am. I get a very frequent rain. It never gets hot. There's stuff out here I could definitely get away without mulching or putting down any kind of straw or cover crop that would have gotten fried in South Carolina. So again, it depends on where you are.
Yeah, that's a good question though.
Yeah, it's a great question.
And if you do cover crops like in like row crops production, yeah, I think rotations are really important and being very thoughtful about what cover crop you're running. Are you running it for erosion control? Are you running it to build organic matter? Are you running it for pest or pathogen control? Um, it makes a big
Fertility.
difference. Yeah. So you really need to be thoughtful as to what cover crop you're growing and why you're growing it. Don't just plant clover because you think of clover when you think of cover crops or whatever. It's something that you need to be really thoughtful about. And you can actually get a noticeable amount of nitrogen from cover crops depending on the cover crop.
And rotation will help you prevent having any kind of allelopathic issues. I've got sunflowers over my shoulder on this poster, and they're allelopathic, but you'd have to grow them multiple rounds before they in the same spot before it actually had an impact. And so doing rotation of cover crops would prevent you from accidentally doing anything like that.
All right. So Michael might ask about fish hydrolysate. So if you want to do a deep dive on that, I would say there's a podcast I did with someone from DRAM talking about fish hydrolysate, and he explains sort of how it's made. The things that I look for in fish hydrolysate, first and foremost, how clean is it? Heavy metals is just something that you always have to check nowadays, and they're all going to have some due to the fish. That's the first thing. I wanted something that's been enzymatically processed in terms of how they break down the fish. And then because it's such a cheat code, I like something that's stabilized with phosphoric acid because that gives me some good available P that I can use in my garden. I mean, good fish hydrolysate is your liquid bottled nutrient, your Band-Aid, your solution to any sort of problem if you just need a little bit of fertility quickly in organics. Anything to add to that, Brandon? Or
Oh, perfect.
nope? Okay. All right. So that's what I would look for. The what's the brand that we work carry?
Pacific Grow with no W at the end. They make the CFOS also for later in the round if you want a liquid Band-Aid without high nitrogen. But they
All
make
right.
a 2-1 0.3 with crab and shrimp, and that's the one I really like. And they'll have really low pH because of that phosphoric acid. So make sure that you bring it back up to a good range. You don't want to water with pH of 3.
So following up on soil depth, question was, would you apply the same answer that you gave before to a 15-gallon pot?
I mean, preferably, I would like a short, wide pot as opposed to a tall, thin pot. You know, like tall, thin pots make sense in a nursery because you want to pack as many plants into your sales space as possible. But for growing, having that shorter, wider profile, you know, like if you buy fabric pots, you'll notice that they're all short, wide pots. They're not tall pots. Um, there's a reason they're doing that, you know. So yeah, I would apply that the same.
All right.
Now,
And then,
if you've got a big, you know, like your dad's got all these great big 50-gallon nursery pots, you know, I fill those all the way up, you know. It's not going to hurt anything. It just makes my, you know, I have to be a little more careful or thoughtful on my irrigation.
yeah, I mean, most 15-gallon pots will work great. The only thing you don't want are those tree pots that are like really narrow, like a vase.
Yeah,
Any other pot, I think, any other 15-gallon pot, your standard nursery 15-gallon pot is fine. Don't overthink it there.
yeah.
One other thing, just as a side note, is you're probably in containers, you are going to get runoff, and that's okay. Um, we want to reduce the amount of runoff that we get in containers when we're watering if we're using a high quality living soil, just so we're not leaching fertility. But I wouldn't get too caught up with the container size. But what I did want to add to that is that um, when we water in a container, we're not going to kill the plant from a single watering. I know Brandon's mentioned this before. It's successive watering. When we water too frequently, typically at a lower amount where we try to get just the perfect amount for the plant, that's where we end up with problems in terms of overwatering and killing root hairs. All right, next question from Chris. What do you guys think of premium pine bark nuggets, 100% pure Dalton's best grow, Orchiata pinus radiata from, okay. That is a lot of words. pH balance with dolomite lime versus a dead mulch straw. I mean, they're both dead, right? I guess they're both mulches. I guess if it's pH balanced, and there's not too much carbon. My other concern would just be the carbon difference with the mulch straw versus the bark nuggets. Pine bark could be an issue, but I think it would probably work fine. I would keep it away from the stem of the plant, give it a little bit of space off of there, a few inches. But yeah, you'd have to do an experiment. Straw works great. The only downside to straw is a lot of times it can contain weed seeds, and then you end up with a bunch of grass that's really annoying to have to weed or till or deal with in the future. The other issue with straw is that it's a good habitat for aspergillus, which is something we want to avoid, obviously. But as long as your straw is staying put, and when you're watering, you're not splashing a lot of water up onto your buds, it's probably going to be okay.
Yeah, the thing just to keep in mind is at the end of your season, you don't want to turn that bark into your soil, rake it off, do your mending, plant your plants, then bring that back.
Yeah. I don't know that I have a lot. You can do a side by side, compare the two, and see if you get better results in your environment, your grow scene, using one over the other. Yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add to that. Looks like I caught up with a lot of the questions, which is awesome. I was going to do a little bit of a humble brag here. Let me show this. This is what Ben shared with us today, Dr. Ben. Oh, let me hide this question. Do you want to do a little talking, Brandon? I'll leave this up there for you.
Yeah, I can't. I'm on my phone, so I can't read it. But I know that Dr. Ben Higgins, who works with us at KiS, also works at Gold Leaf Gardens as the chief research scientist at both companies. And so How long have you been working with Gold Leaf? Over 10 years now, working with them and their soils, Tad?
Oh yeah, at least at this point. Yeah. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was. I mean, here's the thing. It was KiS soil 10, 15 years ago. Now it's gold leaf soil, at
Yeah,
this point.
yeah, yeah. It's their
Um,
soil, but it's originally KiS soil they've had for like 10 years. And they just they were at the Leaf Bowl and took home some trophies. And so actually Ben and I talked about it yesterday on the phone for a while. I just can't remember. I think it was the Rick James and then another one.
Ken Sticky Jr. and one for best exotic. And Kokua is the name of the company that owns, they're the umbrella company for Gold Leaf. And Doty is the branding where the Marshawn Lich collaboration,
Marshawn
which
Lynn.
is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then they also won for best tropical floral with purple propane. So those purple
Oh,
propane, Ken
okay.
Sticky Jr. were the two cultivars.
Nice. I actually got to try those both recently. So that's really awesome.
Nice.
But yeah, so we're super proud of them. And yeah, like Tad said, humble brag that, you know,
So this,
Tad,
to share another photo here, this photo, let me see, when was this taken? I don't know if I can tell. It was, oops,
oh,
I made it
HPS in
go
there.
away. Yeah, it doesn't say. Shoot, that was when we first started working with Gold Leaf. Let me see if I can pull it back up here for you guys. But basically,
It's gotta be old just because it's all high pressure sodiums.
yeah, this was back in the medical days, and we did a trial with them looking at um, our biochar and our water only soil. So this is when I had first learned about biochar. Let me see if I can see it in my um, other thing here. But basically, I gave them the biochar soil and I gave them the water only soil, and they ran a trial comparing the two. And what they found, oh, this is from 2015, 10 years. There you go. What they found was the biochar soil significantly, as you can see, it's the one, I think it's on your guys' left. It's the one significantly taller, more biomass, it's growing better. Um, and this is where they started using our soils. They had this huge, complicated grow formulation of this much of this product from this company, this much of this product from this company this week. And it was super convoluted. And so when I met them, we're like, here, just try this. Just water. We'll see how it goes. And it kind of evolved from there. But I didn't expect to see a difference just from adding biochar because, from what I had understood about biochar and the fact that our soils had a lot of biology in them already, I would have thought, we wouldn't see a noticeable difference. But this is the first photo that really sold me on adding biochar to our soil mixes from 10 years ago now. Wow. Yeah.
That's cool. It's always been my hypothesis that it's the water retention that that does that bump, but it is a really impressive bump, and I think everybody's seen it at this point now. That's used biochar.
Yeah, it's funny that grow. It was like 120 light medical grow in downtown Seattle in kind of the industrial district, and so it was all stealthy, and it was just the building, and you wouldn't have thought anything of it until you walk inside, and then it just hits you in the face. But they would the Cube 93, which is the large radio station at the time, would do their haunted house right next to it. And so people would be lined up around the block, all around this building, and had no idea that there was this massive medical grow going on right there. It was pretty funny. And now they're using LEDs. They've moved to a whole nother location further south in Lacey. But yeah, it was pretty cool back in the day to see that when there weren't that many larger grows. So
That's cool.
yeah.
I had some friends in Columbus, Ohio in the late 80s, early 90s who had it was like a family business that had been closed down for like a whole generation, but they still had the warehouse. And the grandkids who were my age set up a grow there that was unreal, and especially back in those days because you never saw something like that. But they had this amazing grow in this, middle of downtown Columbus in the industrial area. It was really cool.
That is cool. Actually, I have some photos of my very first grow. Now that I am looking through some of my old favorite photos here, I can put one up really quick. These genetics are kind of funny. This would be like I had like Sweet Cindy 99 and Blue Orca, the one, um, all these different ones. And so here's the plants, and they were looking really, really good until one day I went out there and everything just like overnight literally was just like fried, like necrotic, brown tips, burning. It didn't make any sense. And basically what I found out, and my brother has yet to forgive him. My dad had taken a pump sprayer that I had used for bleach to clean the indoor. We had an indoor room that was up some stairs in an old shed, and I'd use some bleach to like clean the walls and clean the room out. And my brother or my dad just rinsed it. He didn't and used that same sprayer and literally just destroyed the entire crop overnight. But you know what? Thank God, because if we had ever tried to harvest that thing, we probably would. I'd probably just be getting out of jail right now. It was way too many plants. So I'm glad it got us back under control. And who knows? They probably would have gotten botrytis or something anyway around here. But it was a fun experience, and I got to run some really cool genetics. And even though they didn't finish, it made for a good story.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so grateful that we don't have to look over our shoulders like we used to. But in retrospect, there was something exciting about looking over your shoulder a little bit. Like I joke with some of my friends that the Terps were in the criminal activity, but I don't know. It was fun, not just that side, but just having to figure it out. How are we going to do this? We have this space. We need water. We need electric. What are we going to do? And I've built farms and grows and different size and scale and all different sorts of like one of my favorites of all time was a salt grow just because it was so weird, and it was those coliseums. I don't know if you remember
Oh
those, but
yeah, yeah, I remember
they're
those.
about these big plastic half donuts with a bunch of holes in them, and you'd stack them and you change your substrate and you run hydroponically. Um, and I had a buddy of mine made this plastic tube, like a plexiglass tube for me that I put a squirrel cage fan to push air through. And I'd hang like a bunch of 450s, like HPS, down the middle of this thing, but I could get in a four, obviously I'm cheating because I'm going vertically, but I think we hit like seven, over 7 pounds in a 4x4, so it was just a really neat, kind of quirky, weird way to grow. Um, they're all fun growing in double trash cans out on islands that we had, access to because we would pretend to be, well, we wouldn't pretend, we'd also be getting oysters. We'd go out on a little John boat and we would take two big 50-gallon trash cans and put a cinder block in one, fill it up with fresh water, set another bucket, another one inside that. And then you wouldn't have to come back to the island, for at least a month and maybe longer. And if you put wicks in, you just make wicks with rope where you tie a knot and then take nylon rope down into the bottom. You'd have, bottom irrigation. So it was a really cool, fun little way to do guerrilla growing. Tying them up in trees, in neighborhoods that just nobody ever looks up. And, you know, I love hiding a plant someplace, even if I don't have to.
Yeah, I definitely went through a phase where everywhere I looked, I saw a potential spot for a grow. That was definitely a thing back in the day. Um, Yeah, some good memories for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. We're running out of time. I'm gonna see if we have any other questions here. Let's see. Is it the oxygen levels in the water that causes root rot?
I mean, yes and no. Root rot is usually some sort of fungal pathogen, but it's there because it's either a facultative anaerobe or an anaerobe, and so that's why it's there. And so, the root is suffocating, so that's part of it, but it's also provide the lack of oxygen is providing an environment that's conducive to pathogens that will, eat that root as well. So I think it's multiple there's different things going on, but yes, and his short answer.
It can contribute to it, and if you have soil that's very compact with low oxygen levels, you're more likely to have issues with pathogens, typically associated with overwatering or media that doesn't drain well. You're more going to be more susceptible to root rot in general. Um, Sorry, you guys, you got me going through my old photos. Here's kind of a fun one. I know some of you might have seen this. I shared this as a trivia question a while back. This plant was so sad. I had it in my this plant's like 5 months old,
Oh,
um, and I could never get it healthy. And I kept trying to transplant it. I tried all these different things. It always looked awful. Finally, one day I just said, screw it. And I decided to kill it. Um, and this is what the roots look like. You can kind of see that there, all these little nodules.
oh no.
And so I'm pretty sure I had root knot nematodes back in the day. We were
Yeah.
passing around. If you do ever see something similar or have plants that just look awful, it's always a good reminder to check the roots and see what you have going on underneath and what your roots look like. I always tell people kick a plant out of a pot and take a look. But yeah, so you don't want root knot nematodes. This needs to go
They're
directly into the
heartbreaking.
garbage.
Yeah.
You don't want to reuse that soil.
You don't want that in your compost either. Like, yeah,
No.
that's a
So,
loss.
yeah. Oh, this is a good question. Why don't we end on this? Is genetic drift from recloning a myth or truth? This has been around for a really, really long time. And I've gotten the opportunity to talk to a couple really good geneticists about this, as well as some breeders that are really known for their scientific approach to breeding and things like that. And my understanding is that it's more of a myth in the sense that we're probably not seeing a lot of actual genetic drift from cloning generation after generation. What we're most likely seeing is like pathogen and viroid and viral buildup. But in theory, there could be small mutations that are happening that could over time create what we call genetic drift. This is the idea that mutations are occurring and that those mutations will lead to essentially having a different plant that's not totally identical to the one before it. But cloning itself does not cause genetic drift, as I understand it. And in theory, that clone should be the genetic match of the plant that it was taken from. And so I don't really think, I think it's more an issue of pathogen and viral load than it is anything else from as it was explained to me. I don't know. Brandon, do you have any thoughts on this?
I got the same information from a pathologist who explained that the term genetic drift, he's like, in the way you guys are probably thinking about it, maybe that's true. He's like, but technically, no. He's like, you're using the term incorrectly. But he was saying the same thing, that what we're seeing is not a change in the DNA, but what we're seeing is a pathogen load, fungal, bacterial, just damage to the plant that over time you may start to see, reduced yields, lack of expression, things like that. But he said that that's just the plant underperforming because after so many generations, it's picked up this stuff that it has to carry along with it, and that weakens the plant. And
I just want to throw this up here because I was going to actually say this before Death Cats posted it. A lot of people anecdotally have said by taking a cut and bringing, that some genetics and bringing them back into a full sun grow, they're able to kind of reinvigorate the plant. And when I asked geneticists about this, they couldn't really give me a mechanism necessarily, other than there may be something spectral happening with the sun. But anecdotally, a lot of old timer growers will say that this works. So I'm not here. Maybe we'll have research in the future that will absolutely explain and share with us how this is happening, but it's absolutely worth a shot. Or you could do tissue culture if you're seeing, something going on with your plant that you really want to bring it back. If you have genetics that are really amazing. So yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of that same sun treatment, and tissue culture would be the other way to go, where people have, Justin McGill had his, what was it? He had his grapefruit that he had forever and he loved it, but it just was not the same plant anymore after, 20 years or whatever. And so he put it through tissue culture to bring it back. So.
I'm just going to throw this up here.
That would line up with the understanding that we currently have, that, because of tissue culture, you would be able to, theoretically get away from any kind of pathogens. And so that pressure, and so the plant would, go back to revert to its optimal growth patterns.
Yeah. And I just wanted to throw this up here. Here's a case where dissolved oxygen plays a big role in water temperature as well when you are doing something like DWC and avoiding pathogens. We were kind of answering the question strictly from a soil perspective because that's sort of our background and experience. But yeah, that's oh, whoops. Sorry. I meant to throw up this one. Sorry. I was reading the wrong one.
Deep water culture, it's crucial.
Yeah, but that, I guess the answer stands. And then Spaz had an answer to it that I put up as thinking of this question, but yes, or this comment. So yeah. All right, guys. Well, appreciate the questions this week and the chat. That was a lot of fun. And yeah, I guess we'll see you at the same time next week, hopefully. Can't wait to do it again. Have a great week.
Chad's back next week, I think.
Oh, perfect. All right. Looking forward to hearing what he's been up to too.
Yeah. Everybody have a good one. Thank you.
All right. Bye.